JavaScript frameworks like React are great for creating a first-class user experience, and the modular style and approach to coding with components, etc., is really developer friendly. But often when people start out learning React, they tend to find starter kits. One of the best ones on the internet is provided by Facebook themselves, the creators of React, the React framework, is called Create React App. And often I've seen a lot of beginners build complete websites with this starter kit and not realize until they go live that there's a major issue because it isn't server-side rendered. So you could have a huge amount of content in your pages, but if you actually go view page source and you inspect the code, there isn't anything here. So if you actually look for where your HTML should be inside this div with the ID of root, there's nothing here. And that's because the content of your website is actually rendered on the client. This is a huge issue for things like search engine optimizations, because when search engines like Google crawl your website, they're effectively not going to see any content. They're going to think that your website is effectively blank, which is of course a huge problem. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to show you from scratch how to do server-side rendering with your React applications. We're not going to use any starter kits. We're literally just going to code this from scratch. It's just one tutorial. It's not broken up into bits. I'm going to show you how to do it, and that is it. But before we actually get into it, I want to show you an example. So if you actually head over, and there'll be a link in the description of this video, to our GitHub page, which is github.com/simpletut, we have some highly relevant starter kits. One is, of course, the Universal React Apollo registration system. This is an open source project with a really impressive tech stack, including Node.js, React Apollo, GraphQL, JSON Web Tokens, and of course, MongoDB. Now I have the demo open here, and this is the user's page, and of course this data is fetched on the server and then thrown down. But if I go view page source, of course you're going to see that there is a huge amount of content, and it is actually server-side rendered. And comparing that with this, you can certainly see the difference that server-side rendering makes. So let's go ahead, let's dive into the code, and let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is create our project folder. So to do that, I'm going to create it on desktop, and I'm just going to call it my React project. Okay, so I'm then going to drag that folder and open it up in my chosen text editor, and I am working in VS Code. So as you can see, I've just created a new folder, and there's absolutely no files inside of that, of course. So we're literally going to be creating this from scratch. So the first thing we need to do is create a package JSON file. That's going to allow us to work with dependencies and write scripts to build and run our code. So the first thing that we're going to do is open up our project folder within terminal. And to do that, I'm going to open up terminal, type in the following command, which is cd, stands for change directory, and I'm going to drag in the folder to terminal. That's going to generate the path to that folder, and then I can click on return, and as you can see here, I'm now inside of my project folder within my terminal window. Now if you're running Windows, then you're going to be doing this within CMD. There may be some slight differences with how you would actually work with CMD and the commands that you'll need to type. For example, you can't drag the folder into CMD on Windows. So there may be some differences, but I'm going to trust that you can follow along with those areas of the tutorial. The other thing is that I'm going to be using Yarn as my chosen package manager. That's an alternative package manager to npm. A lot of those commands are either the same or very similar, and again I'm going to trust that you can follow along with those areas of the tutorial. But I'll do my best to highlight when some of those things might come up. So to create our package.json file, I'm just going to say yarn init. And once I do, that's going to prompt me with a few questions. I'm just going to run through that because I want to generate the package.json file, as you can see here. Now that we have that, I can just go ahead and install our first dependency. So yarn add, and I'm going to install Express. Okay, so if you're using npm, it would be npm install Express. Okay, so that's installed. Once we have that, I can set up our server. So the first thing we need to do is create a new file in our project directory. That's going to be called server.js. Inside of here, we need to require Express. So const Express equals require Express. Now that we have Express, we can create a new instance of our app. So I'm going to say const app equals and call Express. We then need to define the port that we want to run our app on. So const port equals an environment variable, which is process.env.port. If that doesn't exist, it means we're running on localhost and we're going to run this on port 3000. Okay, so then we need to actually set our app up to listen to that port. To do that, we just have to type in app.listen and then pass our port, and then we're going to pass a arrow function where we can console log a message. I'm going to be using 2 backticks, and my message is going to be app running, $ opening and closing curly brace, and I'm going to pass through the port, which is set up here to actually tell you what port we're running on. Now if I execute this code, and I can do that easily from my terminal, I can execute it by typing in node and then the name of the file. The name of the file is of course server.js. You can see that we are running that successfully on port 3000. Okay, so what we need to do is go ahead and write our first React code. Before we can actually do that, we need to install those libraries. So to do that, I'm going to type in yarn add. Again, if you're using npm, it will be npm install. And we want to install a couple of things. We want to install React. We want to install React DOM. We want to install React Router and React Router DOM. There may be a few more, but for now I'm just going to go ahead and click on return to install those dependencies. Now that we have them, we're going to have to come back to our server.js file a little bit later because we need to actually have some code to pull into this file. So let's go ahead and create a new folder within our project directory. It's going to be our source folder. And in here we're going to create our page component. So I'm going to have a pages directory. But I just want to highlight here that the project architecture I'm creating is completely unique to me, but we are just writing plain React Node code. So this is just what makes sense to me, but there's no restrictions or reason why your folders and file structure has to be like this. So if you think it can be done differently in a better way, then you can structure the project folder and architecture as you like. So let's create our page component. So in the pages folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this my home page component.js. So there you go. Okay, so I'm just going to expand this so it'll be a little bit easier to work with. And what we need to do is actually create our class. So we need to import React from React, and then we can create our class, which is class, and I'm going to call this, you can call this anything you want, obviously relative to the page and the component that you're creating. Now this is going to be my home page, so I'm going to call this home, and that's going to extend React component. In here we need to have a render method, and we need to return something. I'm going to return, for now, something pretty simple. I'm going to return a div with h1. h1 will just be my home page, and I'm going to have a p tag, and I'm just going to have some text, which is some content. So again, it doesn't really matter what content we're rendering here. I just want to build this out, show you how it works, and obviously the content inside of it, it really doesn't have much of a bearing. As long as I can show you that it's working and is server-side rendered, that's all we need to achieve here. So I just need to go ahead and export that. So export default home. That's the name of our class. So that now that we've actually done that, we can go ahead and create our routes. So to do that, outside of the pages folder and inside of my source folder, I'm going to have a new file called app.js. In here, we need to import a few things. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to import React from React. And much like before, I'm going to create a class. So class app extends react.component. We need to have a render method, and we need to return something. I'm going to come back to that. I'm just going to say export default app. And then what we actually want to return, I'm going to import a few things. So what I want to import, so I'm going to say import from React router. And what we want to import, first of all, is going to be switch and route. Import React from, okay, I just had a slight error here. Instead of saying import React from, I wrote form, so we need to say import React from to fix that error. That's one of the great things about VS Code. It actually shows you those errors. And then also I need to actually import the page component that I just created. So to do that in this file, as I said, we're specifying our routes in this file. We need to import that. So I'm going to say import. Now the name of the class that I created was home. I believe I can check that here. Yeah, home. So in app.js, I'm going to say import home from home. So that's in pages and then home page component. Now it's a good naming convention for components to actually specify component after your name. And again, I'm using camel casing, but again, these are the kind of things which are up to you. So where we return, I'm going to have a switch component, and inside of here I'm going to have my individual routes. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. Okay, so we're going to have route, and then I'm going to specify the path. So again, this would be up to you to define the path. So the path is obviously the URL. So it could be /example, and that would be the name of the route and the page in the URL of the browser to view the route. For now, I'm just going to do /, which will kind of account for everything. And then there's a few ways of defining the route. You could say component and pass the component. We're going to be doing something called, we're going to be using render, and we're going to pass props, and then in here we're going to pass it our home component. but I'm going to be using the spread object to pass props if there are any. So that's our first route created and our homepage component. Okay, so we've come quite a long way. If we just recap, we've created our main page component and of course app.js, which is where we defined our route. Now we're about ready to bring that into server.js to handle rendering that on the server. After that, we're going to need to handle rehydrating it on the client. But before we can get that far, looking at our server.js file, we're going to need to use some Es6 syntax. Before we can do that, well, currently, if we try to do that, it would just crash our server. So that's why we need to bring in Webpack. Webpack is going to transpile our code into standard JavaScript, and then instead of executing the server.js file like we did previously, we're going to execute the bundle that Webpack actually outputs. So let's go ahead and install those dependencies and a couple of presets that we need to actually start working with Webpack. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the Webpack dependencies. We need 3 dependencies for Webpack. So I'm going to say yarn add Webpack. We need Webpack CLI and also Webpack node externals. And click on return, and that's going to go ahead and install those dependencies for us. Okay. And okay, so now we need to install the presets that we're going to be using within Webpack. Now these are going to be used when we are transpiling our code. The only thing I want to say here is that there are going to be quite a few presets that we need to install, and it might be a little bit tricky for you to follow along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and install them here. And then I'm going to open up my package.json file and I'm going to show you in there. So it's going to be a lot easier for you to see what packages, what I've installed. So let's try that. Let's go ahead, yarn add, and there's quite a few here, as I said. So Babel loader, Babel CLI, Babel polyfill, and then we have some presets. So Babel preset.env, Babel preset React, Babel preset ES215, Babel preset ES217, Babel preset stage 0. Okay, let's go ahead and install those. And then we can clear that out. Let's make this terminal window a little bit smaller, and let's go and have a look at the package.json file as I promised. Okay, so what we've got here, as you can see, is Babel CLI, Babel loader, and actually what I'll do is I'll make this bigger. So as you can see, we have Babel CLI, Babel loader, Babel polyfill, Babel preset env, Babel preset ES215, the same for 217, preset React, and preset stage 0. Okay, so my mistake, there's also one more dependency we need to install. So I'm going to come back to my terminal, yarn add Babel core. Okay, I'm going to install that, and that should add that to our package.json, and that should add that dependency, as you can see, to my package.json file. So as you can see, there's quite a few here. My suggestion to you is to pause the video here so you can actually see, go through and install these dependencies. Once you have, we can actually go ahead and create our first Webpack file. Okay, so we're now ready to start working with Webpack. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create our Webpack file. I'm going to call it webpack.server.js. And we need to export an object from here. To do that, I'm going to say module.exports equals an object. And this is where we basically define everything that we want to tell Webpack. So the first key on this object is going to be target, and we want to specify that we are targeting Node. That just tells Webpack that we are working with Node, and it should exclude things that we wouldn't want on the server. So that's going to help us minimize the file size of the server bundle. Then we want to specify the entry point. So entry is going to be server.js. Then the output object. And the first key on this object is going to be the file name. This is the file that is output by Webpack. And we're going to call this the bundle.js. Then we have to specify where we want to output the file. We do that with a key called path. So before we can actually do that, we need to require it. So const path equals require and require path. What we can then do is use a function on this object. So path.resolve, and we pass that the current directory, and then the folder we want to create, which is going to be called build. And if that folder doesn't exist, it's going to be automatically created for you by Webpack. And then the public path, which is the final key on this object. So it's the public path, and that is going to be / and the build folder that we created. Then finally we pass it the module. That's an object. It has an rules array, so a rules key, which has an array on it, and inside of the array is a single object. And first of all, we need to tell Webpack what files we want to test for. We do that by passing it a regex, so it'll be something like this, .js $/. Then we have to specify the loader, and we are using Babel loader. And then we can exclude something if we want to, and we do. We want to exclude the node modules. So it's the file here. So node modules folder. It's actually // And then we have to just pass it some options, which is going to be an object of presets. So presets, which is going to be an array of presets. The first preset is React. The second is going to be stage 0, which is going to be used for some async functions. And then I recommend you just copy this, because this one is a little bit tricky to explain. So it's an array with a string of env. We then pass an object with a key of target, which has another object, which has a key of browsers. And that has an array itself with a string of last 2 versions. What this basically does is it tells Webpack that we want to support the last 2 versions of the main most popular web browsers, and that's regarding the transpiled code that we will output ultimately. And then the final thing that I want to do, before I can do it, I need to include it, require it. So at the top I'm going to say const Webpack node externals and require, there you go, Webpack node externals. And what I want to do is after the module object, I'm going to say externals, pass it an array with Webpack node externals and call that. So I can save this file, and that is pretty much it. We have now configured Webpack for our server bundle. So what I want to do now is actually configure server.js to render the HTML on the server. Before we can actually run Webpack, we need to have the code in place that is going to actually do what we want it to do. So to do that, I am going to first of all try to demonstrate a few things to you. So the first thing is I'm going to execute the server.js file and show you what happens when we visit localhost 3000. So again, I'm going to say node server.js. So we are not using Webpack at the moment. We're just executing it. So we are running on port 3000. And I'm going to go in my web browser to localhost 3000. And you can see here, I just get this sort of error message, cannot get. So how can I actually capture a request on the server and throw down some content or a message to the user? So to do that is really simple. All you have to do is say app.get and specify the route. First of all, I'm going to enter asterisk. That's basically means for every request. I then pass an arrow function. This arrow function gets a request object and a response object. I am going to say res.send, and when I do that, I can say what I want to throw down. I'm going to say I want to throw down some string. Let's say this is my working app. Okay, now I'm going to need to restart the server. When I do, I can come back to my browser, refresh the page, and you're going to see that I've now actually got this route working. But of course, this is not even near what I want. What I want to do is I want to actually have, I want to render out my React component. So to do that, we need to make a few changes in the file. But it's actually really easy. The first one is we need to import something. We need to import Babel polyfill. Now, you might notice something a bit different. So before, when we imported or required something, we used this syntax. But now I am using Es6 syntax. I'm using this import syntax. And the reason is because of Webpack. When Webpack transpiles this code, because of that, I can use this import syntax. So now I can convert this file. So where I am importing Express or requiring it, I can change this to say import Express from Express, because we are going to use Webpack. Okay, so obviously these are just two constants which I'm defining, so that's the same. But I can, going forward, I can use this syntax, which is really good. So the next thing, I need to actually import some libraries. So the first one, I need to import React from React. I need to import React DOM server from React DOM, React DOM /server. And then I need to import a few things from React Router. So I'm going to say import from React Router. And what I want to import here is the static router. And then what I need to do is inside of here, I need to basically render to string my component. To do that, I need to import that app.js. So import app from src app. And I'm going to create a constant, and I'm going to call this content, and that's going to equal React DOM server, which is what I created here. This has a function on it called render to string. Now render to string is where we are going to put our static router, and between this we have our app component. Now we have to pass a few things here. The first of all is the location. We're going to get that off of the request object, so request.url. It's compulsory that we also pass context, so I'm going to say const context equals an empty object for now, and I'm just going to say context equals context. We then need to actually render some HTML. So what I'll do is I'll say const HTML equals 2 backticks, and what I'm going to do is say HTML closing HTML. I'm going to have a head tag and a closing head tag and a opening and closing body tag. Inside of the body tag, I'm going to have a div with an ID of root, and inside of the div with the ID of root, I'm going to bring in our content. And where I am currently sending a string, I'm actually now going to send HTML. Okay, so that looks great, but I'm going to preempt a few things. I'm going to preempt that when we actually try to run our server, we're going to run into a few bugs. So I'm going to tell you what the fix is, and then I'm going to explain. But before I can, we need to install one more dependency. So I'm going to come back over to my terminal, and I'm going to install that dependency, which is yarn add body parser. Okay, once that's installed, I am going to import it. So I'm going to say import body parser from body parser, and then here where I underneath the where I'm defining my creating an instance of my app and defining the port, I'm going to pass in a few things. I'm going to say app.use, and the first thing is body parser.json, and also I want to make the build. So we're going to generate a build with Webpack, and what I want to do is I want to make that publicly available. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to say app.use. So we're going to say express.static and specify the build folder for now as publicly available. So every file in there is publicly available. Okay, great. So we're now ready to actually execute this, but currently we don't have a way of actually doing that. So to do that, we need to add a script to our package.json file. So just above where I have my dependencies, I'm going to create a scripts object, and this is how I can actually define my scripts. So the first one that I want to create is going to be my Webpack server. Okay, and the script that I want to run is very simple. It's just, I have to call Webpack config, the name of the file, which is webpack.server.js, and I'm going to say that I want to watch the file. So if any changes occur, that it should continue to retranspile the code. So how do we actually run this? So the easiest way of running this is by going to terminal and saying yarn run, and then the name of the script that I created. In this case, it was Webpack server. So let's go ahead and click on return, and that should run Webpack. So it's running that command, and there you go. It's created a build. Inside of the build directory, I have a bundle.js file, and there is the JavaScript. So what happens now if I actually want to run this on, in my browser? I want to see it. So at the moment, we have no way of doing that in the same terminal window because we're executing one command. But what about if we want to execute more than one command? Okay, so to run more than one script at a time, I'm going to actually close this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say yarn add. We need a few more dependencies. The first one is called nodemon, and the second is npm run all. And I'm just going to go ahead and install those dependencies. Okay, so now that's installed, I can go ahead and come back to my package.json file. So now that we have those two installed, we can go ahead and use them, and I'll explain what we need them for. So we're going to need to create two more scripts. The first one is going to be prefixed by Webpack as well, and it's going to be Webpack:start. And what this is going to do is handle executing the bundle.js that's actually outputted. So it's the equivalent of running server.js, but on the bundles that we create. So to do that, we're going to be using nodemon. And first of all, we need to specify the file or folder that we're watching. We're going to watch the entire build directory. And then we have to specify what we want to execute when a change is detected. We want to execute node and then the build and bundle.js. Okay, so now that we have those two scripts, let me explain what they're doing. So Webpack server is actually transpiling our webpack.server.js. Okay, so as we've defined it to in this file, it's going to run it every time that it detects a change in our code. The problem is then that if we execute the bundle and we're running it, when we actually do retranspile our code, we have a change, we would have to manually go back to terminal and restart the server every time. We don't want to do that. So this script here watches the build, and whenever the code is updated, it re-executes the bundle. So that means that we can just refresh the browser and we're good to go. But there's one more problem. So the next problem is a simple one, that basically we would have to have two terminals running to run these two scripts because they both need to be running together. So the solution for that is actually having another script, which is npm run dev. Okay, now when we run this script, we're going to be using the npm run all package, and what this allows us to do is just say we want to run it parallel, everything that is prefixed with Webpack. So now if we come back over to terminal and we run that script, so yarn run dev, it's going to execute both of those two scripts. We can see app is running on port 3000. Let's go over to our browser and let's refresh the page, and you can see that our page is server rendering. So if I now right click and I go view page source, you can see that that's our HTML, and that's what is now being rendered on the server successfully. Okay, so we've done pretty good so far. We are successfully server rendering our page. But there's something else that we need to do, and the best way for me to explain it is to actually demonstrate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my page component, and I'm going to add a button underneath my p tag, and it's just going to have something like some text in the button of console log some text. And we're going to have a method right above our render method, which is going to be called example method. And whenever that's executed, it's going to console log a string, which is going to be JS is running. And we're going to execute that on click. So we're going to say on click, call that. So we'll just say here, this dot example method. So in theory, what should happen is when we click on this button, it should console log JS is running, which obviously would suggest that JavaScript is running. So let's now go back over to the browser and refresh the page. So there's our button. Before I click it, I'm going to inspect and open up my console. Let's go ahead and click on this, and remember what should happen is we should see a console log in our console. Okay, so I'm clicking it and nothing's happening. Okay, so this is something else that we need to do. We need to rehydrate the browser with our client bundle. So at the moment, we don't have a client bundle. So we need to go ahead and generate that. So what we need to do is in our source directory, we need to create a new file, and this is going to be called client.js. And actually, we don't have to do very much at all. It's pretty simple. We just have to say import React from React. We're going to need to import React DOM from React DOM. And finally, we're going to need to import something from React Router DOM, and that is going to be the browser router. And finally, we'll need to import our app component. So we're going to import app from pages. Oh, sorry. No, it's actually app. So we need our app component. And then what we need to do is we need to say React DOM dot, and that object has a method on it called Hydrate. And all we do is we say we want to first of all pass the browser router, and we're going to pass through our app component, and then we need to specify document dot query selector, and in here we just say the ID of root. Now if we come back over to our server.js, you're going to remember that we added this div with the ID of root. So we're targeting that in our client.js. Now, there's a few other things that we need to do. We need to create a client Webpack, and then we need to update our package.json scripts to account for it. So let's create that. Let's go into our main project directory. And create a new file. It's going to be called webpack.client.js. And we're pretty much going to be doing the same thing. So I'm actually going to copy this entire block of code and paste it in here. I'm going to tweak it slightly. So I'm going to remove the node externals because we want to bundle in those node modules. And what I also want to do is instead of outputting a file of bundle, it's going to be bundle, or should I say prefix it with client underscore bundle.js, and instead of outputting it into a build directory, we're going to do build/public, and the public path is going to be build/public, and then we can go ahead and save the file. We actually also need to update the entry point because it isn't server.js. The entry point for this is the source folder, and expand that and into client.js. So client.js. Okay, so let's save that. That looks great. What we need to do now is basically do the same thing as we did for our server Webpack file. So I'm going to copy this line, and actually above it, instead of saying server here, I'm going to say client. And again, I'm going to update where we say server to client. And it's going to basically do the exact same thing. It's going to output the client bundle, and it's going to continue to watch that for changes. Now let's go back to our server, our terminal, and let's re-execute the command of yarn run dev. And there you go. Let's see what happens. So we've run that. Let's now look in our build folder. Let's refresh it. Okay, there you go. There we have it. We have our client bundle. So this is pretty good, but there's still a few tweaks we need to make. So the main thing that we want to adjust now is actually to come back over to our server.js. Now at the moment, we are saying that express static, we're just making the entire build available. The issue with that is that if we were to come over to the browser and do /bundle.js, we have an ability to access this file. And that is a security issue because we could have a secret key, we could have some sensitive information in here. That is why within the build folder we have a public directory. What we're going to do is when we make the build folder available, we're going to say /public. Now if I was to come back here and refresh this page, it does not allow it. Doesn't allow me to access the page. And actually it takes me to my homepage route because I specified that this route was going to be made available for everything. That includes basically 404. So, and I did that in my app.js file where I said path /. If I was here and I said, you know, /home, and I came back here, refreshed it, you'll see I get nothing. So, you know, there you go. The bundle is now no longer accessible. If I was to say client_bundle, then I can access this. And you can see also this is a much larger file because this has the node modules bundled into it. This has actually got React inside of this code. So I hope that's pretty clear. I'm going to reset the route back to / to account for everything because we're really just looking at server rendering, not how to do routes. But again, let's come back actually to our homepage component, open up our console, and let's see what happens if I click on this button. So nothing is happening still. And I'm wondering if you can figure out why. The reason is, if we look in our public directory, we have our client bundle, but it's not being called anywhere. So to call it, it's incredibly simple. We come back to our server.js file, where we basically create our HTML. And just before our closing body tag, we're going to create a script tag. And I'm wondering if you guys figured out what I'm going to say next. We have src equals, and we literally say client underscore bundle.js. Let's save it. Let's come back over to our web browser and refresh the page. And now let's click on the button, and there you go. JavaScript is running. We're successfully doing it. So just to recap, we have only made the public folder accessible. That's great for security, because what that means is that effectively only the client bundle is accessible. We are protecting our server bundle, so if we have any sensitive data or information like secret key, it's basically protected. So that's really, really good. And then of course we're calling our client bundle just within the HTML that we're throwing down, because if we inspect the element, there we are. There's our client bundle. It's actually called just in a script tag. So there's a couple of other things that I want to show you as a bonus. The first thing that you're going to wonder is this at the top. How do you add custom page titles? So this couldn't be any easier. So to do that, we use a really cool package. So I'm going to come back over to my terminal, and I am going to install another package called yarn add React helmet. And believe it or not, this package was actually released by the NFL, so that's American football. And then I'm going to re-execute yarn run dev. Once that's installed, I come back over to server.js, and I need to import that dependency. So I'm going to say import from React helmet, and I'm going to import helmet. And then after I call the render to string function, I'm going to create a new const, which is called helmet. That's going to equal helmet.render static. And then what I can do, and this is actually shockingly easy, but within the HTML, I'm going to say helmet.title.toString. And I'm going to duplicate this because it will also work with meta tags. So now that I've actually done that on the server and I've configured that in the app, I can go to my individual page components, and I can create a new method at the top of this file. I'm going to call it head. And to do this, I need to import from React helmet, and I need to import helmet. And in here, I'm just going to have to return something. I'm going to return helmet, which has a title tag, and it's just going to be my page title. And then inside of my div here, I'm just going to call this .head. And now if I come back to my browser and refresh the page, I get my page title. And even better, if I look at the view page source, I get my page title here too. And if I was to enter any meta tags in here, it would actually be server rendered there too. But hopefully you get the idea. At this point, it's safe to say that we have already achieved what we set out to at the beginning of this tutorial. But just to recap, as you can see, if I go view page source, you're going to see that we are successfully server rendering our React application. I also showed you how to add custom page titles and rehydrate the app so that we have obviously JavaScript running on the client. But at this point, there's a couple things that I want to go over, and also an additional feature that I want to show you how to do. First of all, I'm going to come back to our package JSON, and there's one script that I want to add. So at this point, we have these dev scripts, these development scripts. So for example, we are compiling we are outputting our client bundle and our server bundle, but we're also watching them for changes and then recompiling them, which we wouldn't want to do on a live environment. And also when we run dev, we're actually running everything, and obviously Webpack start that executes the bundle as well. So really we need an additional command, which we'd probably use on a production environment, for a build script. And the build script would be different in a sense that it would transpile the code. Webpack would output a client and server bundle, but it would not watch the files for changes, and it certainly wouldn't execute the bundles after it has completed transpiling the code. So to do that is really simple. It's going to add an additional script. We're going to call it build, and we're just going to take this code which we already writ, so for the client, everything but watch, and we're going to input that for our build script. We're going to have an and we're going to literally just put that in for the client and server. So if I now save that, let's come back here and let's delete our build folder, because I want to show you the difference. So I'm going to delete that. So that's no longer there. I'm going to come back over to my terminal window, and I'm going to say yarn run build, click on return, and it's going to run that for us. It might take a few seconds. But once that's done, I now have the build folder. I can come back here, and of course I have both of my client bundles and my server bundle. So obviously this as well, if I check my terminal, it's not watching anything, so I can type in anything here, so you can see that the server is not running. So I successfully created a build script, and that's really important when you want to go live. And now I'd just like to take this opportunity to encourage you to visit our official GitHub page, which is github.com/Simpleton. We have some really exciting open source projects that are really exciting, such as our open source universal user registration system, which has an incredible tech stack including Node.js, React Apollo, GraphQL, JSON Web Tokens, and MongoDB. Although this is not our only React starter kit, so I really encourage you to visit our GitHub page. There will be a link in the description of this video, and I would really appreciate you checking that out. You can also follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Simpleton, and this is a great way for you to stay in touch with us. And as we release new content and updates, you can stay in touch with us, and of course, there will be a link to this in the description of this video as well. And of course, our official website, which is simpleton.com, where you can browse all of our tutorials from our website or our YouTube channel.